Welcome back to another episode of the Whiteout Report podcast. We are here tonight. We are your hosts, Marty Leap and Dylan Callahan Crawley. We are here tonight to preview Saturday's game, Penn State's final non-conference game, maybe their final preseason game might be the best way to put it, as they host Villanova at 3:30 at Beaver Stadium ahead of next weekend's bye week before they get ready to host Oregon on the final Saturday of the month in a whiteout primetime NBC, the game everybody has circled. Before we get there, we've got to get through one more game. As I said, maybe more appropriate to call it a preseason game than a non-conference game. The state of the opponents, but as James Franklin and his staff would tell you, Penn State still has plenty of things to work on this weekend, especially after a lackluster, to put it kindly, performance against FIU last Saturday, especially in the first half. So, you look ahead to this Saturday. I mean, Dylan, as we talked about on the recap show this past Saturday, I think the offensive line is going to fall under some heat again. But, I think they played better than they were given credit for. But I definitely think that this Saturday is one where you would really like to see that group come out against an FCS squad, albeit a solid FCS squad in Villanova, top 10 FCS squad, but still an FCS squad. You would like to see them come out and just kind of push the Wildcats around and exert their dominance as they get ready to head into conference play.
Yeah, you put it well there. I think after this past week's performance, which I think the second half helped redeem part of the first half performance, you'd still like Penn State to come out this week and kind of assert their dominance a little bit more against a Villanova team that they should, beat pretty handily here. We saw last week in college football a handful of Power 4 programs take on FCS programs and really lay down some big beatings. Now, I'm not sure any of those programs are really as good as this Villanova team is. This is one of the better FCS programs in the country, as you mentioned. But at the end of the day, we're still talking about, a very good Penn State team here, a top 3 team in the country in Penn State. So definitely looking for Penn State to assert their dominance. I wouldn't be shocked if this one is close in the first quarter, maybe the first quarter and a half. Penn State only has a 14-17 point lead, going towards halftime. But at the end of the day, I expect this one to, be a pretty sizable margin of victory for Penn State. I think, they know that they don't have a ton of time until Oregon comes to town in 2 weeks here. There are plenty of parts of their game that they have to clean up before then. And this is their last chance to do it in a game situation. So I think we're going to see a focused Penn State team on Saturday, and one that comes out, I think, a little bit more finely tuned than we saw last week. Still won't be surprised if there's some hiccups early, but I expect this to be a much different performance this week.
Yeah, you mentioned them coming out being more finely tuned, being a little bit more locked in, that sort of thing. And I think that's a great point. I mean, I don't know how much you've seen from the reports from the open segment of practice tonight for the media, but it definitely seems that the coaching staff was more than happy to lay into anyone or bring that energy for anyone who was not at practice tonight. I think that's kind of the idea of the coaching staff is, hey, what happened last week, that's fine and dandy. You won the game 34-0, but if you play the way you played last week against Villanova or against FIU, you bring that energy, against an Oregon, against a lot of Big Ten teams, you're going to find yourself in some trouble. So, I mean, I think the coaching staff's going to come out and have these guys motivated not to let that happen again. I mean, the last time Penn State played Villanova, it was not an easy game for them. Now that was a much different Penn State team in 2021. But still, it's still an in-state game. There's plenty of kids on the Villanova roster who probably feel slighted that they never earned that Penn State offer in high school. That's going to always be a motivating factor, right? I get this is not even close to apples, but I can guarantee you there's a lot of kids on the USF roster last week. That was a driving factor for them when they went into the swamp and beat Florida. So, and you mentioned last week, you and I have talked about this in other places. Week 2 in college football is always weird. It feels like that's always the week where week 1, no matter who you play, you're amped up, you're ready to go. Week 2, there's so many games where you play cupcakes. I mean, Georgia screwed around with Austin Peay. LSU struggled with Louisiana Tech. We said Florida lost to USF. Clemson probably should have lost to Troy. Arizona State lost to Mississippi State. Winning college football games are hard. And when you're sitting here like we are right now and like we were Saturday afternoon, nitpicking a 34-0 victory over an FBS opponent and over a team that's probably going to legitimately contend for their conference championship, I think that speaks more of the volumes of the team and what the expectations are more than anything else.
Yeah, as our good friend Clay put it in a group chat, or he shared a photo from another chat he had. Winning in college football is hard, and winning by 34 points any week is a pretty good week to have. Obviously, Penn State could have won by much more last week had they not performed so poorly in the first half. But yeah, absolutely. I think, definitely can't take this Villanova team lightly. I don't think Penn State needs to bring their C game to win this. That they could win this game by playing pretty poorly still. But, this is a well-coached Villanova team. This is a Villanova team that's going to come in there and look to, make this competitive early on. They don't want to come in and get embarrassed by Penn State. So it should be an interesting matchup here. But, like I said, this is a well-coached Villanova team. They have quite a few players on both sides of the ball that really stand out, including their quarterback, Pat McQuaid, who was good last week against Colgate. So I'm curious to see how, maybe not as much of how Penn State performs in this game, but I'm kind of curious to see how Villanova stacks up against Penn State in this game. Because, I don't know if they will ever make the jump, but at the same time, Villanova makes sense in the future as maybe an FCS team that could make that jump to the FBS. We've seen multiple programs do it here in the past. Obviously, Villanova has successful sports across the board. And one of their neighbors down the street, basically in Delaware, recently made the jump up to FBS. So it could make sense on that. And so, I'm almost going to be more interested to see what Villanova looks like this week compared to Penn State. But yeah, it should be interesting. I guess we could jump just into what we should expect out of Penn State this week. The last few weeks, 2 weeks have not been, I think, up to expectation for most Penn State fans when it comes to the offense. Drew was really good against Nevada, shaky last week against FIU. The rushing attack has been up and down. The offensive line has been up and down. I guess for you, do you expect pure domination this week from this Penn State offense? Do you expect them to open up the playbook? I've heard other people say that that's not really a thing. Teams aren't going to – you're either explosive or you're not. Every play is supposed to be a touchdown play. Yes and no. Obviously, yeah, every play can be a touchdown if it's run perfectly and if the opposing defense makes some mistakes along the way as well. But you can't tell me that Andy Koltanicki hasn't been keeping quite a portion of his playbook under wraps, not just for Oregon, but for Big Ten play in general. Because at the end of the day, Penn State doesn't need to be anything more than vanilla to beat the likes of Nevada, FIU, and Villanova. There's just they don't. So you cannot tell me that they don't have a good portion of this playbook still under wraps.
No, I agree, because we know they want to be explosive. We hear James Franklin talk about that, consistently. He talked about last week after the games. What's he always talk about? He goes to turnovers, third downs, and explosive plays. Those are always a big three with James. They have been as long as he's been here. And he mentioned, hey, yeah, we won the explosive play battle, but we weren't good enough. So I think that's an area they're going to look to be better this week. I will also say I think some of that does come down to execution. As we talked about last week in the postgame show, there was a run early in the first quarter where if Nick Singleton sees the hole, he's probably going 80 yards for a score. Trevor Pena, I still don't know what went wrong on that double move that Drew Aller was looking to for what could have been a long touchdown. And then right before the half, the pass play where Kyron Hudson seemed to kind of tail his route off a little early.
Yep.
It probably cost himself a long reception. So I think it's there to be had. I'll be curious to see how aggressive they are with pushing that this week. Because like you said, it's twofold. I know people say, oh, you don't hide things, but you do. It doesn't matter. When you have that first big test, you're going to see things you haven't put on film yet. When you get into a playoff game, a conference championship game, for Penn State this year, an Ohio State game, you're going to pull things out you haven't pulled out yet. Every team in the history of football is going to do that.
Yeah.
But That said, the explosive plays, you want to get that into a rhythm. You want to get that down before you get into conference play. So that's where I'm going to be curious this weekend to see how aggressive they are with, I don't know if forcing is the right word, but you know what I'm saying, trying to really create those explosives. How aggressive are they going to be on throws down the field to a Devontae Ross, to a Kyron Hudson, trying to get Nick Singleton off tackle and spark some long runs.
But also going back to it, I mean, one of Andy Klodnicki's first press conferences with Penn State, what did he say? The offense is like a Dairy Queen Blizzard, right? You got the vanilla base, and then over time, you add in all the fun stuff to the Blizzard. With the Blizzard, it's all your toppings, and the offense, it's all the motion, it's all the eye candy for the opposing defense. Penn State is still working on getting, like you said, getting that. Those vanilla plays, to be executed properly. Because if you can't properly execute a normal gap or zone run, you're not going to be able to execute it when you're throwing in a bunch of extra steps before the ball is snapped or whatever it may be. So I absolutely agree with you there. But I think it was just I wanted to bring up the Blizzard point because it just goes back to the whole idea that Andy Klodnicki definitely has things in this playbook that they have not used yet, and they are choosing to not use yet in this season. And it's going to be very vanilla this week, I'm sure, as well. Against Oregon, I'm sure we're going to see a ton of motion, a ton of guys moving around. Vega Ione is going to be at wide receiver. I'm sure there's going to be a ton of eye candy in a couple weeks, but not this week.
That's spot on. And I think the motion is a great point because I think people don't realize how much that pre-snap motion can help create explosive plays in football. Because if you get the defense moving in one direction or just the confusion that could cause, let's say you send the guy in motion and, your nickelback and your safety both think they're supposed to go with him and they both move that direction. All of a sudden you open up that lane. Most of the time, pre-snap motion, that's what you're doing it for, is just to try and get the defense moving, try and get the defense to show you something.
Try to see what coverage they're in.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not a perfect example here, but I mean, if I'm playing, NCAA or college football 26, and I'm playing on offense, I almost always use a wide receiver, put him in motion just to see what the opposing defense is. Mm-hmm. And if I'm doing that in a video game, which has no, meaning whatsoever, they're definitely doing it on Saturdays every single time. I mean, you see it in college football and in the NFL on opening drives a lot. Offenses put a lot of guys in motion on opening drives to try to get an idea of what the opposing defense is doing in certain situations. They do it a lot early on. Sometimes you don't see as much motion as the game progresses because at that point, the offense has a pretty good idea of what the defense is bringing that day. But yeah, I absolutely agree. Motion is – there's a reason that motion that plays with motion have a higher success rate than plays without motion. It is just a great tool to, yes, get people – get different mismatches, matchups, whatever it may be, but it gives you a lot of information about the opposing defense. And when you have a veteran quarterback like Drew – and honestly, it's not even a veteran quarterback at this stage. I think when you are a power forward starting quarterback, you should be able to, at that point, be able to diagnose and understand what opposing defenses are trying to do once you kind of figure it out at the line of scrimmage, whether, you're looking at doing it through motion or just, using what you learned through the film in the week prior.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. I think just that alone, adding that extra motion, that again, I don't think we'll see some of it on Saturday.
But there's always some of it.
But that alone can really open things up when you get to an Oregon and beyond. And again, I think Saturday you're going to see them be vanilla because they can be. And I think one thing that you've heard a lot of people toss around when talking about Penn State this year, was something that Ohio State did last year effectively, is when you're in essentially a national championship or bust kind of mindset, is that idea of load management also, right? You don't need to overtax these guys in these games. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You want to be as healthy, rested as possible for the postseason. So I think that's a factor too. I think offensively, to me, I mean, we mentioned earlier, we touched briefly on the offensive line. I'm still not worried about the offensive line. I think they played, especially from rewatching the game, I feel even more confident saying they played much better against FIU than people gave them credit for.
I agree. But at the same time, this week, the offensive line, I absolutely want to see them. Like, they don't have to play a perfect game this week, but this is a week that, you're now 2 weeks away from Oregon. You're not facing anybody next week. You have to. This is really the position group where they need to assert their dominance. Like, this needs to be a really good week for the offensive line. If they struggle this week at all to run the ball, that is going to be concerning for me. Just because if you can't do it against Villanova, you can't do it against FIU. Why do I think you're going to do it against Oregon? Now, that being said, last year, one of my good friends, Zach Seiko, was saying the same thing going into the Big Ten championship game about the Russian attack. He didn't know if it was going to be able to hold up. And then I was being the other side of it, saying that I thought they were. And that was, during a part of the season where the Russian attack at times wasn't necessarily lining it up on the scoreboard or the box score. But I would like to see the Russian attack and the offensive line this week have a lot of success. There shouldn't be many runs that go for negative yards, 1 yard, 2 yards. These are the type of games where I think Penn State should be averaging 5-6+ yards per carry at the least, especially both Singleton and Allen.
Yeah, I think it comes down to you want to see them exert their dominance this weekend, right? This is an offensive line that we fully believe is capable of dominating people, in Big Ten play. Yeah. So you want to see them be able to do this against the Villanova, and you look at the defensive line they're going to be facing, and this is no knock on any of those kids from Villanova. It's the size wise. Yeah. It's not what you're going to see in the Big Ten, right? I'm looking at their roster right now. They have 3 defensive linemen over 275. You need to come out. You need to push this group around. You need to dominate. Yep. And I think if you can do that, the one other area on offense that I really want to see improve this week, and dominant offensive line can help with this, is you want to see a much better game from Drew Aller, obviously. I mean, he was the first person to come out last Saturday. Hey, I wasn't good. I was overthinking things. I got in my own head. And, we said it here. We've said it in a couple group chats. You'd rather that happen against Florida International than against any Big Ten team. But you can't let that happen again, because I think moving forward, you don't want that to happen this weekend because you want Drew into a good rhythm going into Oregon. And, you look at that Big Ten schedule, the way he played against FIU, you can get away with that against Northwestern, against Rutgers. There's not many teams on there where you can get away with that win. So I think that's the biggest thing. You want to see Drew. And like you mentioned, he was great against Nevada. I thought against Nevada, his football IQ was on full display. Some of the reads he made, going through his progression, seeing the field, knowing when to tuck and go, all of that stuff was so good. You want to see that again this Saturday. You want to see him make the easy throws. You want to see him. You don't want to see him throw the ball a lot. I mean, I think ideal scenario, Drew comes out Saturday and has one of those 17 of 21 games.
Yeah, I was going to say it should be 15, 20 attempts tops in this game. And now you think Ruckemeyer could come in the second half, get another 10 or so himself. They're going to throw the ball 25, 30 times in this game. But Drew should only throw the ball 15, 20 times, and he should be out of the game, ideally, if everybody does their part, by midway through the third quarter at the latest. I mean, it's not going to be this, but, Minnesota versus Northwestern State last week, Minnesota pulled their starting quarterback, Drake Lindsey, with 9 minutes to go in the second quarter because there was already, I think, 42-0 with 10 minutes to go in the second quarter. Now, Northwestern State is one of the worst teams in all of Division I football, FBS and FCS combined. But the point remains, Penn State should get their starters out of this game, including Drew, early on, because the longer they play in this game, it's almost asking for bad things to happen. These are on the games that you want to risk injury. But yeah, I want to see Drew this week. The key word is just efficient. Be efficient. Like you said, 17 for 21. Doesn't have to be a ton of yardage, but if he's 17 for 21 for 230, 240 with a touchdown or two, that's a good day in the office for him. As long as he's efficient, there's no glaringly bad throws. And now part of being efficient is also maintaining your mechanics and, being consistent in your mechanics. That is still something he struggles with routinely. But if he can be efficient, get in and get out. If he can be efficient, get in there and get out of there, his day and the starting offense's day is going to be a much quicker day. If he struggles, they're going to be there much longer than they have to be, and that's, like I said, asking for trouble after a certain point.
Yeah, and you mentioned the mechanics. That honestly, in a lot of ways, was the biggest issue against FIU. I mean, you go back to that throw. I know we discussed it on the post game. That swing pass to Nick Singleton that was there. It would have been a monster game where the mechanics were off. The second he released it, you saw his reaction. You knew he missed the throw, and it was because of mechanics, right? So that was definitely something that, again, you want to see be much better this week is the mechanics.
And it feels like part of the time, especially on deeper passes, is that he just almost trusts his arm strength too much and thinks he can just kind of, without, using his hips, without, again, that torque, he can just kind of, make a strong 40, 50-yard pass, which he does have the capabilities of doing. But when he, is fundamentally sound in his mechanics, I think the results are very drastic compared to when he's not. And I don't want to use the word lazy, but when he just trusts his natural arm strength and talent a little too much.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very valid point where, you're just trying to, hey, my arm's going to get it there without focusing on the touch, the things of that nature. And, one other thing with Drew, because I was going to mention this earlier when talking about the offense, opening up the playbook, but I figured I'd save it when we got into Drew. I think it was very clear last week he had the directive not to run the ball. And, there was a couple times where there were some RPOs where had he kept it, it was going to be a big gain. And they were selling out to stop the running back. And I do think that's one thing when you get into conference play, you're going to see change. You're going to have to see change is Drew using his legs more. And I also think that will go a long way to opening this offense up because if he's whenever he's handing it off on these read options, if the defense can't sell out on Nick Singleton, can't sell out on Katron Allen, that goes a long way for their ability to get the ball in space, make guys miss, have a lane, and make a play. So I do think that's something that will definitely change in conference play with this offense. That, again, that paired with more motion, I think, can have a bigger impact on the explosiveness of this offense than people think. Because remember, an explosive play doesn't have to be 50 yards, right? There's a big difference between running the ball 2, 6, 8, 4, and boom, 15, boom, 12, which 15, 12 may not sound like super explosive plays, but that can shave 2 to 3 plays off a drive and make a big difference.
Yeah, and I mean, you saw that last year in the games like against Oregon in the Big Ten Championship. They weren't necessarily hitting home runs every play, but they were picking up 10, 15 yards on those runs and some throws, and it really made the whole world of a difference. Great point on Drew running. I'm looking at the stats from last year. I mean, he had 96 carries last year in 16 games, which was about 6 carries per game. Some games he had more, some games he had less, but so far through 2 games, he has 8 carries, and 5 of those, I think 6 of those came against Nevada, just 2 last week, and I'm sure he's going to be told this week not to run it either. They can't risk him getting hurt running against Villanova or FIU because the risk is just not worth the reward there. Yes, against teams like Oregon. Honestly, I think he will be allowed to run against Oregon, but I still think they're going to tell him to be smart about it and don't overdo it because, yes, Penn State wants to beat Oregon. If Penn State beats Oregon, they're going to be in a very good spot going the rest of the way. But you also can't take off a bunch of times against Oregon, take a physical beating against what's going to be a very physical Oregon defense, and then you're either banged up for the rest of conference play or you suffer a serious injury because you ran too much. So I think they're going to allow him to run against Oregon, but they're also going to tell him to be smart about it because you can't risk, losing 1 game is okay. They could probably lose 2 games and still be okay throughout the season. But if they lose against Oregon, they need him to be healthy the rest of the way. So I think as the season progresses, you'll see them allow him to take off a little bit more and more. But even against Oregon, I think they'll probably play it more safer than not. He's going to run, but he's not going to – I don't think he's going to – now, I mean, it's true. I mean, it's not like he's going to run 15, 20 times a game. But I just think they're still going to probably play a little on the safer side against Oregon because you still do have such a long season ahead of you. If they're with national championship aspirations, you're still talking another 12 games.
Yeah, one more thing on Drew here, and before we'll talk a little bit about the defense, but and tie it back to that the discussion, the comparisons to Ohio State last year. Look at Ohio State last year. Will Howard, what was he known for? His legs. Outside of the Oregon game and the Penn State game, until the playoffs, Will Howard did not run much. And I think that was part of the idea. Hey, against Oregon, against Penn State, we're going to empty the chamber because these are the big ones. These are the ones we got to win. And I mean, they lost against Oregon, but still. And then in the playoff, again, he was kind of giving that free reign. Tuck it, go, run, do whatever, because at this point, you can't leave any stone unturned. So I think you're going to see something very – not that Drew's the runner that Will Howard is, because he certainly is not, but you get what I'm saying, where, again, in this new world of college football, where you're going to see this load management that we're used to seeing in pro sports that you've never seen in college football before, you're going to start to see that some. And I think this is just another fine example.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's been kind of the comparisons for a long time, but Drew is very much in that mold of a Joe Flacco, a Ben Roethlisberger type, who they're not going to take off a ton, but when they need to move, they are mobile enough to pick up valuable yardage. It's a long time ago at this point, but people forget that Flacco and especially Roethlisberger were quite a bit mobile in their early years. Yeah. Both obviously slowed down quite a bit once they took hits from NFL defenders for a couple of years, but both those guys early in their career had the capability to pick up. They weren't Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts out there, but they could get you 5-6 yard gains here and there a couple of times a game if needed.
Yeah, Ben Roethlisberger is the big one to me because it's someone who I've lived in the Pittsburgh area my entire life, and even though they're not my favorite team, I've always grown up watching the Steelers my entire life. There's so many times he drew last year against Oregon, last year against USC, some of those late second half surges he had. Guys hanging off. I'm like, man, I feel like I'm watching a young Roethlisberger. It's just that's always been the comparison I've made, so I like that one. But yeah, we'll again, the defense, we'll touch on them briefly here. I mean, they've been pretty awesome through 2 weeks. It's been what you would expect with Jim Knowles. If anything, they look maybe a little bit ahead of where you expected them to be.
Yeah.
Knowles runs a complicated system. And, you heard from Ohio State fans, it takes 3 years to install it. I think that was more sour grapes than anything. I also think that the talent in place at Penn State when Jim Knowles got here this spring, this offseason, was better than the talent that was in place at Ohio State when he got there 3 years ago. So I think that helps too. But through teams, they've been awesome. I mean, you look like you have an absolute budding superstar in Chaz Coleman.
And that's who I think is the X factor for the remainder of the season. If Chaz Coleman is this, now obviously he's not going to do what he did against FIU every week. If he does, then all bets are off. But if Chaz Coleman can give you even a quarter of that every week for the remainder of the season, I mean, the ceiling of this Penn State defense goes so much higher than it was, and it was already pretty high. Because what was the big question coming into the season? Who's going to be that guy opposite of Denai Dennis Sutton on the defensive line or a defensive end for Penn State? Because obviously DDS is a terrific elite pass rusher, but who's going to be that guy on the other side that when an opposing defense or offense double teams DDS, who's going to be able to come off the other side and make them pay for that double team? Chaz Coleman right now is looking like that guy, and even beyond him, they have had a few guys so far this season really flash in that pass rush. I mean, Zariah Fisher last week coming off his first game back from injury, he had 7 pressures in that game, 6 quarterback hurries. Yvonne Kamaju has 4 pressures in 2 games. Malachi Williams has a few pressures. Jalen Harvey has looked solid when given opportunities. I mean, it's been an encouraging start for the young guys in that defensive end room because they needed 1 or 2 of those guys to step up this season. Now, the competition level hasn't been great. They're going to get really tested against Oregon, and if somebody doesn't flash, I don't think it's a reason to panic. But building block-wise, I think Penn State's definitely on a path here in which, Zariah Fisher looked really good last week. But if they can get a Chaz Coleman and a Yvonne Kamaju or a Malachi Williams or a Jalen Harvey to also take that next step with them, that will be so huge for them going throughout the rest of the season. So I'll be curious to see which one of those guys has a big week this week. I'll be watching the defensive ends more than anything else.
Yeah, the defensive end room has been phenomenal. I think I know I touched on it last week on a post-game show. I think the safeties under the radar have been really good. Corners haven't been tested, but it's a cornerback group. I mean, you got A.J. Harris, maybe an All-American. You feel confident there. I think defensively, you want to see a little bit more from the linebackers probably. I think Tony Rojas has looked really good through 2 weeks. Yeah. You know what Dom DeLuca is. You're still kind of waiting for that third guy to emerge. Amari Campbell's had some flashes. He's also had some plays where it's like, what are you doing? You know, but I'm still confident that can come around. I mean, I know this is a comparison I've made in our group chat with Clay is early on in his tenure here, Jalen Kimber had some of those moments where it's like, what are you doing? And then you went back and you watched his film at Florida.
Yeah,
he was coaching.
Fantastic.
And there were some bad habits to break. And once he did, he was really good. And I think Amari Campbell, different position, but could be in a similar boat because the defensive coaching at UNC those last few years under Mac Brown, it certainly left a lot to be desired. So, again, you're going to get into some of those bad habits that can be hard to break. But I think the athleticism's there. But that's what I'll be watching on defense this week. I just want to see, you know, Amari Campbell, Keon Wiley, those linebackers. I want to see that third solid, consistent, reliable linebacker emerge because you're going to need them at some point.
Yeah, that's a great point. And just on Rojas is one of those players where he will still one or twice a game have a bad play where, you know, you're saying to yourself, you're now in your third year, you can't be making these mistakes in your third year. And then he'll have 4 or 5 plays after that where you go like, all right, you're really, really good at this. And so he's just an interesting player like that. I think he probably plays too fast for his own good at times. He needs to just slow it down sometimes, and he still is going to be perfectly fine when he does that. But yeah, I agree with everything you said there. Linebacker room is definitely still a work in progress. I think Rojas is also really good. Mark Campbell and Dom DeLuca are both solid to good. Both have their shortcomings. But yeah, they definitely need another guy, I think, to emerge in that room just to give them the needed depth that they're going to need to go forward this season and compete for a national championship.
Yeah, absolutely. So we get ready to wrap it up here tonight, previewing. We'll see. Last week, Dylan, we know that you picked Katron Allen as the offensive MVP of the game. I picked Chaz Coleman as the defensive MVP, and they were the staff's offensive and defensive MVPs. So we'll get into it here with our offensive MVPs, defensive and score prediction. Hopefully we can nail that offensive and defensive MVP again this week.
Yeah, I mean, that's the goal, right? Hopefully every week we at least look like we know what we're talking about, right? And that would be a great way to do it. I'll let you go first because I got to think about this one.
Offensively, I'm going to say Drew. I think they're going to make a concentrated effort this week to get that passing game back into that rhythm we saw against Nevada when it was getting spread around. Right, what was it? I think 7 catches for Pena, 6 for Hudson, 3 or 4 for Reynolds, 3 or 4 for Dinkins. The backs were getting involved. Devontae Ross was involved. I think we're going to see that effort this week. Get that passing game back into a rhythm before the bye week and before Oregon. I think that's going to include a chunk shot or 2 down the field to Hudson, to Ross, whoever it may be. Maybe even Luke Reynolds catches one and outruns the defense because that's always a possibility. So I'll take Drew on offense. Defense, I want to say Chaz Coleman again because I'm all in on the Chaz Coleman hype train.
Yeah, we may have to make a rule eventually. I know, but no, we can't pick Chaz Coleman or deny Dennis Sutton every week.
Yeah, I'll go different this week, but I'll say Dom DeLuca. For some reason, this just feels like a Dom DeLuca game where you look up at the end of the game and he's got 10 tackles and a sack and a pass breakup, and he's been all over the field. I'll take Dom DeLuca on defense. I think he's due for one of those games this week. And then for the score prediction, I'm with you. I can see it starting a little slow. They kick it into gear. They pull away. I'll say Penn State wins it 42-7.
Yeah, that score prediction is right about where I'm at. For my picks wise, I'm thinking, starters are gonna be in for maybe 2.5 quarters. We should still see plenty of second string and some third string guys in there, even in those first 3 quarters. So I'm gonna go with some off the board picks here. Offensively, I'm going to go with tight end Andrew Rapplier. I feel like Luke Reynolds could have a nice game here, but I'm going to go with Rapplier to have a strong game here, a couple catches, 50, 60 yards, maybe a touchdown. And then defensively, I am going to go with Antoine Belgrave Shorter, a guy who had a big fall camp, big offseason. First two games have been, I think, on a little bit the quieter side. He has 4 tackles. But yeah, I'll go with Antoine Belgrave Shorter. I'm feeling an interception out of him and 5 or 6 tackles this week.
I like it. I like the Belgrave Shorter pick. He's another guy I've always been high on, as you know, and I think I may be one of the least surprised people when he emerged with that starting safety job out of camp.
My backup pick there, and just kind of a secondary pick, was Darius Dixon, the true freshman corner. Feel like we're going to see a lot of him in this game. I could see him getting an interception in this game, maybe a couple tackles as well, or a couple pass breakups. Because obviously, you don't want your cornerbacks usually to have too many tackles, because if they do, it's usually because they're giving up reception. So watch out for maybe a Darius Dixon interception and a pass breakup or two.
I like it. So we both think they win this win.
Score.
My bad.
Give me Penn State 49-0.
49-0. Shutout again. That would be, if you can go into conference play with 2 shutouts under your belt, having allowed 11 points total. I don't care who you're playing. You're happy about that. So
absolutely.
All right. Well, that will do it for tonight for the Whiteout Report podcast preview show here with our friends, as always, at ProLine TV. Make sure Saturday, join us live 20, 30 minutes or so after the game wraps up, after Penn State hopefully dispatches of Villanova to finish the non-conference schedule at 3-0 and head into the bye week. And then it'll be full steam ahead to Oregon. Not just one of the biggest games on the calendar this year for Penn State or in the Big Ten, but in all of college football. But for Dylan, I'm Marty. That'll do it for tonight. We'll catch you guys Saturday afternoon.